Our first speaker is Chris McManus. Chris McManus won an Ig Nobel Prize in biology. He has been on the tour before. Those of the speakers who are on the Ig Nobel tour for more than the first time, I've asked, don't spend your entire 5 minutes talking about your prize. Spend 1 minute telling us what you did that won an Ig Nobel Prize, and then spend the other 4 minutes telling us something else that's just as good that you've been involved in or run across. Here is Chris McManus.
Thanks very much indeed. 2002 I got the prize. That was what it looked like in those days, very cheap as you can see. And I got it for a paper I published called this. Now, you know these sort of trashy papers. I've only got a few seconds to talk about it. It's the sort of stuff that some journal somewhere will publish, and that's what happened here. It wasn't much of a journal it came out in. It was a while ago, it must be said, 1976. And it came from a strange source. I was in the neurosurgery department at the time, and it wasn't very long, 353 words. Great thing about it, it made the cover. And that's what it's really about. There we go. Now, I'm always asked a number of questions about this, and I haven't got time to answer them. Just 2 very quick answers. Why did I do it is the usual one. And I only have one explanation for this. Except, I was young. The other question I've always asked is, how did I do it? And of course, there's a practical problem. You know, you go into a museum and you want to do some measurement. Now, most people don't realize, but doctors do have a very highly refined, sophisticated instrument for measuring ovoid volumes. And it's called an orchidometer. And it's very simple, basically. You hold the orchidometer in one hand, but I didn't do that, because they don't let you in museums. And so I used what we in the trade call the eyeball test, which worked more than adequately. Okay, now, that's enough about this research. People ask, where has this taken you? Well, it's taken my life in many ways I would never have anticipated. Perhaps the most interesting is the number of things I've been asked to review, because I'm obviously regarded as a specialist in all sorts of strange areas. For instance, I was asked to review an exhibition at the Handel House in London, and you can see why they thought it might be something that I'd be knowledgeable about. I get books to review. This one, I'm not quite sure why they thought I was an expert on the topic, and I'm clearly not. So anyway, I managed to find something to write, as one does. And then this is a recent book I had to review. And this is the one I want to talk a little bit about. It was an interesting book. Now, of course, I'm a scholar, and so I went off and I did some deep background research, which essentially meant going to Amazon.co and seeing what else had been published in the field. And you can see there's a number of things which have been published. Most of them not terribly scholarly, it must be said. But then suddenly, out of nowhere, I found this. Now, this is an interesting work, and it's clearly in a different class from some of the others. Now, you may think that Philip M. Parker, this was just a one-off production, but oh no, this man is a proper scholar. We can look at some of his other ones. There's one on the rubber version of the product in India. There's one on the United States. There's one on the lambskin variant in Greater China. And there's one on the rubber version in Russia. And there's another 16 where they came from. This is no fly-by-night scholar, this. He's doing his job properly. Here he is. You may think that's a rather protective gesture he's got, but I couldn't possibly comment. Now, of course, I wanted to know if this was all he specialised in, because you'd have thought this was enough, 20 books. This must be enough to keep a man busy. But when you look, I found this on Amazon. Now, let me just blow that up a bit. In fact, let me blow that up an enormous amount. These are just 20 of 85,628 books that he's published and which are available all from Amazon. And at that point, one has to say, well, what are these other books? What's he doing? Here he is, by the way. He's a professor of marketing, and he's clearly done that part of the job very adequately indeed. He's got it out there. Let's have a look at some of these other books, because they are really rather intriguing. The 2007 import and export market for pens, pencils, and fountain pens in Peru. Now, it must be said, he's a bit repetitive. And I haven't got time to go into them in enormous detail, as you can see. But I'm going to have to carry on a bit, because I can't... There's so many of these books. This is the one I tried to get. And I did want to know about wine made from fresh grapes or grape must in Poland. I ordered it. There we are, I paid $2. And what came? There's the parcel. I got a children's book. And somewhere, some children are reading about grape must in Poland. I'll stop.
We'll take two or three questions. Raise your hands, please, and somebody with a microphone will race up. You're stunned.
I have.
Repeat the question.
Have I read the children's book yet? It's interesting by 1960s standards, I must say, but it didn't say much about Poland and what they're doing with all that grape juice they're producing, so it was a profound disappointment, it must be said.
Next question.
Do any of these books exist, or are they all Daddy's home, left over from...
Repeat.
Yeah, do any of the books exist? Well, it's a very interesting question. In some sense, they're latent virtual books. As far as I can tell, they're print on demand. In fact, they're worse than that. They're write on demand. And so they're produced when somebody wants them. But I have actually got one copy in my bag over there of one of them. It's a rather boring one on a medical disease, and Erwin has two other books, and he tells me they're exceedingly tedious, very repetitive, and completely unimaginative. But having said that, I've got a feeling that pencils in Peru could be different. I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris McManus. Our next speaker is David Gaudian, and I will, for the most part, let the speakers tell you what they did. David?
Thank you very much.
We seem to be a UCL contingent so far. What that says about UCL, I'm not quite sure. But, this is for work on MRI brain imaging changes in the hippocampus of the taxi driver, which was published in PNAS, a serious scientific journal, some years ago. And what I'd like to do is just give a brief introduction to how different perceptions of this one piece of work. We saw it, of course, as a serious scientific paper, and the lead author, Eleanor Maguire, has special expertise in looking at the brain structures underlying navigation skills. You all know here about the knowledge. I don't need to go into this, but London taxi drivers are renowned for their skills in getting around. And what was shown in this paper was that the hippocampus, which is involved in navigation skills, is structured slightly differently, really quite subtly differently, in the taxi drivers compared with normal controls. And this leads to all sorts of interesting ideas about remodeling, neurogenesis, and all sorts of interesting scientific things about the hippocampus. The changes seem to be greater with increased experience, again, an interesting scientific observation. But anyway, let's go on to see how different people saw it. It was slightly embellished, I think, by the Ig Nobel Prize committee. And possibly slightly embellished by some of the newspapers and cartoonists. I think the economists possibly get surprised for the slightly more upmarket papers. And for the slightly less upmarket papers, probably the Daily Sport wins. And The Guardian didn't do badly either. And nor did the taxi drivers, I suppose. One of them, of course, was the winner of Mastermind before some of you were born, I'm afraid. Various comments from various taxi drivers. And the ultimate accolade goes to the lead author, Eleanor Maguire, I think, for this cartoon here. So, of course, there's all sorts of possibilities for taking this forward. And I call this current research, I guess it's maybe improbable, it may actually be impossible research, but having been on holiday in another city, I wondered to what extent these results could be translated firstly to different cities, and secondly to different domains of transport. And having initially spent our honeymoon in Venice and having returned to Venice, wouldn't it be nice to look at the hippocampi of Venetian gondoliers? And of course, technology evolves. There are now new high-field MRI scanners. And so just to show some very, I guess, improbable research, here's a brain of a Venetian taxi driver, Venetian gondolier, should I say. And what you can do with the various twiddle knobs now on the scanners is, show up areas. And here's one hippocampus. Does this pointer work? There. Why don't we see what it really looks like? And the detail is just with these new scanners is truly remarkable. And you may say this is unbelievable. Of course, you may think it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable. But we all know that there's very prominent research been going on for many, many years on the hippocampus as a spatial map, the initial studies by John O'Keefe, who's now at UCL. So, of course, this is remarkable. We've just come back from skiing. We're planning to look at ski instructors and look at piste maps, and I think there's all sorts of possibilities that we can take this forward. So thank you very much, and thank you to the Ig Nobel Committee for awarding this prize. And thank you to a number of colleagues for helping with the slides, including Sally, who's here in the audience.
What questions do you have for David Gaudian? Is there somebody can get a microphone to just leap over the, well, don't leap over the.
No.
Do you suppose that the overdevelopment of the hippocampus has any effect on taxi drivers' ability to actually hold a coherent opinion on any topical subject matter?
There is a strong correlation, whether that is causal, or, you know about correlations, they don't prove causality, do they?
Next question. Wave your arm around. It's a little tough from down here to see what's in our. Oh. Can somebody get a microphone over here?
Have you tried other image modalities, for example, ultrasound or near-infrared or anything?
We would do. Actually, to be honest, these images, particularly the Venetian images, they provide much better spatial resolution than ultrasound. And I don't think we'd pick up the canals.
Thank you.
David Gaudian, thank you very much. Our next speaker won the Ig Nobel Medicine Prize, he and a colleague, a couple of years ago. It's Jim Gunnlach from Auburn University, and they won for their study titled The Effects of Country Music on Suicide. Here is Jim Gunnlach.
Back in 1991, Steve and I put together the study, Country Music and Suicide, and it went into press and it was published quicker than anything that we'd ever written before, no second reviews or anything else. But to sort of understand the study, you sort of need to look where it came from. I was teaching a statistics class using multiple regression. Some of you may know what that is or not. And we were playing with a data set which had suicide rates as a dependent variable. The cases were large cities in the United States. And after we predict the suicide rates for the different cities, I did a calculation of the residuals, the difference between what is calculated by the model and the actual suicide rates for the cities, and sorted them and printed them up. And this was all done interactively by computer in the classroom. And the city of Nashville, Tennessee turned right at the top. And everybody in the class, it was like light bulbs going off everywhere, said country music. And I said, that is an interesting theory. Country music could be related to increased suicide rates. But I have no idea how we would be able to measure that. But one of the students, by chance, was a student in radio and television, and he knew where data were on the percentage of the radio market in every city was in the different musical formats, one of them being country and western. And so we took a break. He went up to the professor's office in his area, got a volume that had it, brought it to the classroom, and we sat there as he read off the numbers, and I entered them into the computer, and we entered nearly 50 cases, I think 49 cases of data in just a few minutes. Usually you don't do that in a classroom because it's rather boring. And ran the first correlation. The correlation was 0.68, predicting white female or white male suicide rates from the percentage of the radio market share in country music. And then after we controlled for all the other variables that we'd used in the model, it was still at 0.56, which is really quite strong. Well, so that classroom experience formed all but sort of the theoretical part of the paper. And we started looking into the literature on the nature of country music and whether or not those factors were related to suicide or not. And it all sort of came in touch to a common joke about country music. What happens when you play your country record backwards? You get sober, your wife, your kids, and most importantly, your dog comes back. And on the job, your boss's son-in-law, who got that job that should have been your promotion, got caught in bed with the boss's favorite secretary. You got your job now. The future looks bright. And and then when you go through and look at the literature on the characteristics of country music, you know, the content-wise, they describe those things that are there in the joke. And then you go look at the literature on factors associated with suicide, and except for the absence of the studies on the dog, all of them showed that playing the record backwards should reduce the suicide rates. After the study was published, a lot of things happened. This is just my favorite picture of a longhorn steer. I just like the guy. I got one death threat. I first went on talk radio a few times, and those events turned into disasters. But then I learned how talk radio functions. I don't have time to go into that here.
but there was a article in Newsweek that called me a conehead academic, and they acted just like the others did. Hi there, and I'm through.
What questions do you have for Jim Gunnlach? Wave your arm around if you've got it up.
Does being called inbred increase your chance of suicide statistically?
Could you repeat that?
I can't hear it.
Oh, we can't hear it.
If someone repeatedly calls
Stand up and shout as loud as you can.
If somebody repeatedly calls you inbred, will that statistically make you more likely to kill yourself?
Inbred?
If somebody repeatedly called you.
That's nothing to do with country music. I was just wondering if there's...
Not that I've seen.
Okay. Do you have any other unrelated questions for him? Way in the back.
Have you studied the effect of other types of music on suicide?
Yes, we did a study of heavy metal and found that it had very much the same kind of effect on young white males. And the measure of the level of music was the subscription rates to a set of heavy metal magazines. And it's got some of the same kinds of characteristics, but nobody bothered to make a joke about it.
Okay, thank you very much. Jim Gunnlach. You remember that the Ig Nobel Literature Prize this past year went to the author of a study on the word the and problems that the word the causes for anyone who puts things into alphabetical order. We have with us tonight Maureen McGlashan, who is the editor of the journal The Indexer. Maureen McGlashan is the person who decided to publish that article. And I'd like to welcome her up here. Maureen?
Isn't it nice to bring your own fan club with you? Well, it's obvious I'm not Glenda Brown. My contribution was quite a limited one. 2 or 3 years ago, spotted in The Guardian a delightful piece by Mark headed Holy Orders. Ah, I thought, just what I need to fill one of those little spaces that always get left over when you're editing a journal just as deadline comes up. And I wrote to him, said, do you mind us publishing this so you can know the sort of rag we are? Here's our web address. And back came the instant answer, love you to publish. What a wonderful journal. I didn't know it existed. And how about sending me Glenda Brown's article on thee? Which I promptly did, because at that moment in time, we were just at the stage where we'd moved into the modern world and the indexer basically existed in electronic form. It's not so long ago when it didn't exist in electronic form. Anyway, that's how it all began. Indexing the definite article or how to win an Ig Nobel Award. This is a rare chance to honor that little word, the or the, depending on how you like to pronounce it or where you happen to find it in the sentence. So little a word that most of you have probably never given it a moment's thought. But actually, like the definite article in most languages, that's to say, the definite article in those languages in which there is a definite article, and there are lots and lots and lots of languages which don't have a definite article. In those languages which do have one, its history is long and complex. My compact edition of the Oxford English Dictionary, that's the big 2-volume thing that you use a magnifying glass to look at, It has got a whole very dense page on explaining how the got from where it was to where it now is. And it comes to the conclusion, towards the end of this dense page, that the, in many of its uses, is quite simply a worn-down case ending. Now, I'm not going to insult you by, and I don't have the time, by explaining to you what a case ending is. Let's just take that for read. The key thing is it's worn down. That's exactly what the word the is, and that's probably why we indexers have such a problem with it. As Glenda explained when receiving her Ig Nobel Award, the is a funny word that sometimes matters and sometimes doesn't. You sort the Bible and the Beatles at B, but you sort the Hague and the camel's hump is an ugly wump at T. And what on earth do you do with concepts such as the blues? In her book, which I'll mention later, she's actually got in her index the blues, indexing of the blues, the pill, and perhaps worst of all, the, or the. I don't care what way you put it. All indexing manuals devote a lot of attention to the problem, and they often give very firm rules. These rules, however, unfortunately, vary markedly from one manual to the next. The truth is that in indexing, it's definitely not a case of one size fits all. Not everybody using an index looks for things in the same place. We get carried away by rules. If you want to know more about them, send the postcards which we've left on all your seats to the address on the back. And best of all, subscribe to that. Oh, questions?
That display of persistence in the face of overwhelming force. This is no accident. This woman is a former British diplomat. We're going to take a couple of questions, and when you have a question, please wave your arm wildly so we can see you, and then don't start speaking until we can get the microphone to you so everyone can hear you. Okay, we have somebody here.
Don't make it too hard.
Why is the alphabet in the order A to Z?
Well, I actually think it's something to do with those camels, which in the Hebrew alphabet, which is a very early version of the alphabet, gave us things like letter C. And I think it will be something to do with and most of the letters of the alphabet, or a lot of them, have some relationship to animals. Bet, letter B, is a house. I think it's the order in which the animals went into the ark.
Okay, next question. Somewhere, there's a timid yet eager hand.
A persistent hand, yes.
What about languages like German, which have multiple articles that have different second letters, for example, der, die, das?
Well, oddly enough, and perhaps you've hit the nail on the head, German books tend not to have indexes. They're not really in the habit of having indexes. It's a developing art with them, and we're trying to encourage our colleagues. And that will be the kind of challenge that we indexers face every minute of our working life. What order do we put it in?
Maureen McGlashan. Our next speaker is Jonhoyland. Some of you read New Scientist magazine, and if you do, I would bet a lot that the one thing you turn to every time, maybe first, is the column at the back called Feedback, which holds a place in the science world unlike any other. Feedback is the place where if there's a question or more an observation that utterly stuns every scientist in existence, they send it to Jonhoyland, who edits that. And John is going to tell us about a few of the things in the past year that have stuck in his memory. Here is Jonhoyland.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. One of the things we like to keep an eye on in feedback is the relationship between technology and human emotions. And an example of this is a story we ran last autumn about two Bosnians, a man called Adnan and a woman called Sana. And these two made contact on an internet chat forum using false names. He was Prince of Joy and she was Sweetie. They both had marriage problems, and they told each other how miserable these were making them. And they found each other really understanding, they got on really well, and so they decided to meet up in a cafe. And they'd carry a single red rose by way of identification. But when they did meet up, it all fell apart. It turned out they were married to each other. And they were so upset by this that they both filed for divorce on the grounds of the other's unfaithfulness. Now, we often have a theme running in feedback, and readers write in with examples of whatever it is. And one that we've been running recently is something we call quantum instructions. And these are instructions that basically are impossible to obey unless you're a photon. And you can be in two places at once. For example, the signs you often see on trains that say, use all doors to exit. And then there's the signs you see when you're approaching Fountains Abbey, so a reader told us, and these in Yorkshire, and these say, use both car parks. Right? And then there's an announcement a colleague heard in Holborn Tube Station, a colleague from New Scientist on the way home. It said, as you enter the platform, please move left and right away from the entrances. And finally, one the reader told us about in a station in Somerset in the booking office, which said, use both windows. And this reader said, do I do that consecutively or simultaneously? And the answer was, the sign is addressed to the queue. Queue's a sentient being, right? Okay, and from impossible instructions, we go to a question that's impossible to answer. And this is a reader who wrote in to say how confused he was when an airport official at the check-in asked him, has anyone put anything in your luggage without your knowledge? I can give some advice on this, on how to answer it. The first is don't crack any jokes, right? If you want to catch your plane, you don't crack jokes with airport officials. Then the next one is don't try and fault their logic. Don't say, well, how could I, right? The correct way to answer the question is no, nobody has put anything into my luggage without my knowledge. That's it, right? Well, as well as sending us in stories, people send us in pictures, and I thought I'd try and show you some of these. This was a reader took his dog to the vet, and it had a skin irritation, and was prescribed some Tavagil, some antihistamine to calm it down, right? And that's what our cartoonist, Paul McDevitt, made of that. Now, I'd like to ask you, are there any gas engineers in the hall tonight? Because if so, do you really need to be told that? Next one is a sign a reader saw there we go, in Japan. Hope you can all work that one out. And finally, a sign in Essex that read like that. Don't tell anyone. Don't tell anybody. All right. I'd like to finish with a story that a reader sent in about phone phobia. And the reader directed us to a website called Change That's Right Now, that defines phone phobia as a persistent and abnormal and unwarranted fear of phones, of telephones. And the website goes on to say, to learn more about our 24-hour phone phobia program, please call us on 1-800-828-78484. And we thought that, well, this whole website was really fascinating, so we had a look at their list of phobias too. And what we found was hippopotamonstrosesquipedaliophobia. And can you guess what that is? It's a persistent, abnormal, and unwarranted fear of long words. And isn't that, I mean, how could they do that? That is so mean. They give a name to a phobia, which means that anyone who hears it runs away screaming. You know, come in, Mr. Smith, we've had the results of your tests, and I'm afraid that you have got hippopotamonstrosesquipedaliophobia. Oh, no, please, don't say that, don't. Ah. Couldn't they call it, give me something with a short name, like flu or thrush? Okay, thank you very much.
Before I forget, noticed, you remember the slides, one example was the Beatles and Beatles, comma, the. A number of years ago, Jonhoyland had a celebrated public squabble with John Lennon, and I think he's going to be on television Sunday night talking about it. And there'll be nobody, there's nobody to argue the other side, is there?
Not this time, no.
Any questions for John about anything? There's a question over here.
Hi. This isn't really a question. I learned about it that the German word for fear of palindromes is in fact a palindrome.
It's how's it go? It's ibophobia. Yeah, ibophobia in English. Ibo is phobia backwards. I don't know what the German word is, I'm afraid. But the English one is precisely, it is a palindrome. It's ibophobia. So if you've got ibophobia and you see that, you go, ah! Yeah.
Next question. Somewhere, scream out if you have one.
What was your argument with John Lennon about?
Should we repeat it in the microphone, please?
Well, this was 1968, and it was...
the question was...
Oh, the question was what the argument with John Lennon about. This was 1968, we'd had the May events in Paris, we had the Tet Offensive in the Vietnam War, we'd had the big two massive demonstrations against the Vietnam War in Grosvenor Square, and John wrote Revolution, a great song to listen to, musically, but the words were a real put-down of all of that, including, for example, you talk about institutions, why don't you change your mind instead, right? So it was a sort of hippie versus political radicalism argument, and I criticised him in an open letter for these sentiments. And then he wrote back a furious letter to me, which began, "Who do you think you are?" And he said that, he criticised the political movement. He said, if you've got minds that hate, you should be more loving, etc., which is fair enough. But anyway, that was what the argument was, more or less. That's what it was about.
Very high pulse rate. Thank you, Jonhoyland. Our next speaker, Erwin Companion, has come here from Erasmus University in Rotterdam to eat quite a bit of soup. I think he can't move. He seems to be gesturing. He's a scholar on overlooked, provocative things that happen in the history of medicine, and he's going to share a few of those with us right now. Here's Erwin Companion. You smell of soup.
Yes. I'm full of soup.
There you go. We're hoping this comes up.
Yes, it comes up. Thank you. Some years ago, I gave some lectures to medical students about the history of medicine, and they got really bored and not interested in it. And so I asked physicians, about the history of medicine, and they also are not interested. They laugh about it. They only use it for the slideshows to make it more fun, and they don't think. And what's more interesting, they got arrogant because they often see themselves as the first one to describe a condition or a treatment, but there are many times they are wrong. So I make it my quest. It's my real quest to search in old medical books and old medical journals for very remarkable cases. And I will share some of these cases with you. What do? I look in old medical books and see if I could find something remarkable, and then I'll search for, is it described earlier, and then I'll try to publish it in a peer-reviewed journal. So, one of my favorite sources is the book of this man. This is Hildanus, a German surgeon, and he lived some very long time ago, and he published 600 cases in this very marvelous book. It is my favorite source of it. I will share some of the cases with you. The first case is a case he described. It was a child was brought by his parents to the market with a very enlarged head. And they showed the child for earning some money, showing it was very normal in those days to do that. But there was a physician visiting this market, and he said that's not a hydrocephalus. That's something else. So he go to the police, and they arrested the parents. And what did they do? They have made a small hole in the skin of the head of the child, inflated a pipe in the inflated air between the skin and the skull, and so they enlarged the head. Both parents were arrested and hanged. And what happened to the child is he did not mention that. So I searched the internet, and I came across a syndrome called malingering by proxy. So you molest your child for earning some money. And this was a review, it published in 2003, and a literature search revealed only 2 documented case reports, but they are wrong. So I published in a search for a journal which was a child abuse neglect, and I published the first case, a case of malingering by proxy, described in 1593. Another case in the same book of Hildanus was about a woman. A woman, very honest, he said, she eat 2 heads of fresh strawberries for breakfast. And 2 hours after that, she thought she was going to die. Because she got blurred vision, she severe dizziness, paralyzed leg, and so on. So Hildanus thought a toad has urinated over the strawberries, and the woman was intoxicated. But he was wrong, of course, because he doesn't know. It is the first case of strawberry-induced migraine aura without headache, described in 1600, and it is accepted in the peer-reviewed journal Headache as a letter to the editor. Another very, very remarkable case in the book of Hildanus is this case. A pain and infertility caused by a too large penis. What was happened? A woman came with her mother to Hildanus, and she said, I have very severe pain in my private part after my man has going to battle. And he looked at the woman, that doesn't look very good there down, and he ordered some medicine. But also he looked at the man, and he looked at the private parts of the man, and he said that doesn't work. So he looked at the penis of the man, and he is going to his trees, and he took some cork. He cut a piece out of it with a hole in it, and put some sheepskin on it, and he gave it to the man, and he said, before you are going to battle, please put its shield before you. And he did that. And after that, the woman has no pain anymore. And also, there are 6 children. Yes. What was known about it in Julie Butcher, Nomen est Omen, published in the BMG, Female Problems in Sexual Pain and Sexual Fears. But you have to see it, because I published this case in the Archives of Sexual Behavior in 2006. But there was also one very interesting case described by Grace Mulliker, because a feminist fortunately described this right very of a woman who was penetrated by a donkey.
Question. Anyone got the guts to ask a question?
There's one.
Okay.
Do you think these problems still persist?
I think the problem is still. I could not imagine why not. You mean the donkey?
Just as the projector went off, I thought I heard you say, "Oh, that's my favourite slide." which slide didn't we get to see?
It was this one, with the title of the article in the Archives of Sexual Behavior.
Erwin Companion.
I'm going to finish my soup.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker, who will slowly make her way up here over the next few moments, is Fiona Barkley. Fiona is a chemist. She was involved with the project that won the Ig Nobel Chemistry Prize a number of years ago. And she'll be speaking a little bit about that.
I'm walking incredibly slowly.
And a little bit about, well, I hope you're not walking slowly because you're not feeling well.
The Ig Nobel Chemistry Prize in 2002 was awarded not to me. It was, in fact, awarded, no, to Theo Gray. This is Theo with a silicon bull. And Theo has many, many feathers to his cap. He's director of Wolfram Research, and he famously invented the periodic table. This is a glorious object, handcrafted in wood, and you can see that each of the element positions is taken up with a beautifully crafted little wooden box, which the top comes off, and inside it, Theo keeps dangerous things. And really, that's all I have to say about this. And I promised Matt that I would speak for a very short time about the previous thing, because many of you have seen this before, and then I would talk about something else. But before I fully leave the periodic table, I would like to draw your attention in a shameless marketing opportunity to our wonderful periodic tables that we build in West London. And you can come and see these later. And also, we sell beautiful periodic table placemats, which you will be able to buy at the end of the show downstairs. These come in 2 varieties, a slightly more expensive 3D one, and you can't buy by bathrobe. So here's a close-up of the wonderful periodic tables we shall be selling after the show. And here's a flavour of some of the periodic tables that we've made. And they just got bigger and generally bigger. So, the topic of the rest of my talk is hot chocolate. Not any old hot chocolate, but self-heating hot chocolate. Now, you can buy self-heating hot chocolate, soup, coffee, And Theo was particularly interested by this. And it's in fact the very ancient, well-known chemical reaction that they use to heat hot chocolate in the can. There's a small compartment in the bottom which has quicklime within it. And to that they add a measured quantity of water when you press the button and break it. And this allows the hot chocolate to warm up to a delicious temperature. So Theo thought, and you'll understand my costume, I wonder if we could heat a bath like that. So here we have some quicklime. I've lost the sound. Theo is pouring the quicklime into, it doesn't matter, it's fine. Some buckets specially designed for the job. It takes quite a large amount of quicklime, you understand, to heat a bath up. And this is in the Illinois prairies, I believe in January. So I don't think it was very warm. So Theo, you will notice, is carefully wearing a mask. And somebody's wearing camouflage. Why? So here we are, we're adding the carefully identified amount of water to the quicklime. And Theo is foolishly and here's the quicklime after the event. So, hopefully that won't play again. I have just one more slide to show you which says something about Theo. That's his kids. Anyway, that's enough from me. I'm glad not to have spoken to you. Thank you very much.
What questions do you have for Fiona on any topic at all?
Oh, gee.
Would you wait. Stop waiting.
What's on the back of your bathrobe?
My name. An element, obviously.
There's an obvious next question, but no one's going to ask it. Anybody have a question on any other topic?
Do you need special glasses to see the 3D placements?
No, if you come and see me after the show, they're very, very cheap. And no, they're lenticular, I believe is the word.
We have but two speakers left. Our next speaker is Kees Moeilijker. Many of you know him quite well. Kees Moeilijker won the 2003, I think the year was it 2003? Kees Moeilijker won the 2003 Ig Nobel Biology Prize for a discovery he made that he will show to you. And he now has a new project which goes to the heart of modern biology, and he will describe that as well. Here is Kees Moeilijker.
Thank you. I'll briefly tell about the Ig Nobel Prize, the research I did to win the Ig Nobel Prize some years ago. I'm a museum-based ornithologist, and I work at the Natural History Museum in Rotterdam. So I don't like birds like this. I prefer them like this, stuffed, so we can put them in boxes and we can label them. Quite coincidentally, the museum I work got a new wing, and it was made of glass. And it happened to be a real bird killer. So I could listen to a bang against the window, go down, pick up the bird, and stuff it. This is a view from the inside of the building. And then, on a late evening in June 1995, I heard a loud bang against the window, and I said, this is something special. So I went down to see what happened, and I saw a dead duck who apparently had hit the window, and a live duck was sitting next to it. And the next thing happened was this. The live duck mounted the dead duck. I'm a ornithologist, and this was not in the textbook. One is dead, and if you look carefully, both are of the male sex. So I said, that's homosexual necrophilia. This behavior was new to me, so I sat down, I took notes, I took pictures, because this rape took 75 minutes. After that, I collected the dead duck, and I checked if it was really of the male sex, and it was, because here you see a rare picture of a duck's penis. Published the paper, the first case of homosexual necrophilia in the mallard. Here's the building again. A is my office, B is the approximate location of impact, and C is the location from where I watched it. And this is the ducks again. And this is the duck. When I got the Ig Nobel Prize, and I never leave home without it. Here is the duck. My life changed a bit after winning the Ig Nobel Prize, and I always keep my eyes open for peculiar bird behavior. And then I switched my attention to birds in the bush. I was alerted by this paper, a very good paper written in 2006 in Sexual Transmitted Infections by Nicola Armstrong and James Wilson. And to boil it down, the conclusion, the question was, it's not about Brazilian people, it's about a way of removing pubic hair. And these authors, they think the decline of the pubic lice may have to do something with the habit of removing pubic hair. And I said to myself, this is the pubic lice we're talking about. It's an insect about 1 millimeter large. This is the habitat of the pubic lice. Hair, pubic hair, although some of them move a little bit higher up and appear in eyelashes. These are the products you can use to remove your pubic hair. And it's not only done by women. It's also done by men. And it's habitat destruction. If you remove your pubic hair, you will destroy the habitat of the pubic lice. And this is to honor the author of the paper, Dr. Armstrong from the Leeds hospital, who found this out. And we invited her to come here, but she couldn't make it. So please, warm applause to Dr. Armstrong. As I'm in the natural history business, I checked our collection, and we only have beautiful insects, butterflies, bees, but our collection did not have any pubic louse. So I started a campaign to get pubic lice for our collection. That was picked up by the international media. And what happened? The first donation came in. These were pubic lice collected back in 1949. And it was donated to us by a now 80-year-old insect collector. And then some recent material came in, all from the Netherlands. These are Dr. Bouzema and Toonstra from the hospital in Amersfoort. And they collected some pubic lice from this man's navel. If you look at the little creatures, that's the pubic lice. And they made a wonderful movie, and they put it on the internet. You can find it. Very well done. And this is the harvest so far. 5 samples of recent pubic lice, all from the Netherlands. This is one of my friends now who collected pubic lice for me from the city of The Hague, a fine series. And this is a series we got from Amsterdam. It's about 7 good specimens. And this is the doctor who collected them. Well, wouldn't you like to be checked for pubic lice? Then I said we have to show this to the public, and we made the grand pubic lice exhibition. They're still there, and they will stay there forever, I think, because everybody wants to see the pubic lice. A whole generation of people grew up without knowing the pubic lice, and their parents, they come to recollect memories. So please, if you find one somewhere, or if you know somebody who has it, are you a doctor, collect them and bring them to me. Thank you very much.
What would you like to know about this? Could get a microphone over here, please. Anyone else with questions? Start waving your arms so we can get to you. Not to touch you or anything.
How do you go about stuffing them?
How do you go about stuffing them?
We don't stuff the pubic lice. We preserve them in alcohol.
Yeah. What is your method? Question over here.
Do pubic lice have any known benefits to the host?
Well, all creatures, great and small, have their own place in the web of nature.
So I had a question about the black and white photo of the male having I think it was a Brazilian. I wonder if you could step back to that photo.
That's possible. I prefer her, I think.
So I wanted to know how old George Bush was when this happened.
Well, it's a picture I got from a friend who got it from a friend. And
This is the basic story of pubic lice. Case Williker. Our final speaker of the night is 2 speakers. It's the team that won the Ig Nobel Medicine Prize this past year for their study published in the BMJ, formerly known as the British Medical Journal. The study is called The Side Effects of Sword Swallowing. And here are Dr. Brian Whitcomb and Dan Meyer, who will join us in a couple of moments.
Ladies and gentlemen, sword swallowing raises a great chance of very important and serious questions, but unfortunately I can only address the first one here in the time available. Do they suffer? Now, 2 or 3 years ago, Dan Mayer, my co-recipient, had 5 swords inside him and was making a video for the Dave Letterman show when the macaw on his shoulder misbehaved and he got a severe pain in the low chest, which became pleuritic, implying that the sword had gone through the esophagus and tickled up the lining membrane of his lung. Now, Dan knew several other sword swallows that had also had injuries. For example, Natasha Varushka, a spectator bumped into her when she had 3 swords inside her. The sword scissored, and she consequently brought up half her blood volume in blood. Now, the spectator bumped into her, putting a dollar note into her belt, although she alleges, and we're quite uncertain where the truth is, that it was a $500 bill into her bra strap, but we're uncertain of the exact details. Now, it's not surprising that sword swallowing causes injuries. On your right here is me swallowing some barium sulfate. Here's some in my mouth. Here's my jawbone. Here it's going down my throat, immediately in front of the cervical spine, where, as you can see in the sword swallower, the sword lies very, very anteriorly relative to the cervical spine, so the throat and the tongue are pushed anteriorly. And here's a CT scan through the middle of the chest. You can see the black lung on either side. You can see the windpipe, the trachea there, cutting cross-section. You can see a little air in the esophagus there. And notice how the root of the sword going down the esophagus is surrounded by all these major blood vessels. So injury is not surprising. But when we looked at the English literature, we could only find a single case report of a Texan who'd lacerated his esophagus. He had the esophagus removed, but he'd survived. But when we looked at Google, there was a vast amount of data. There was a story about a Canadian who'd died swallowing an umbrella, a sword swallow had fallen off the stage with a sword in situ, and so on and so forth. So we set about rectifying the medical literature. And we used the Sword Swallows Association International, of which Dan is chief executive. And here's a few of them having their annual conference in 2002. And Dan has this amazing database. Across the top is what these people do: swallow swords, swallow curved swords, swallow multiple swords, fire eating across the top. And down the left-hand side, we've got the name of over 100 sword swallows: Professor Otto No Better, the great Gozelwan, Misbehave, Alexander, and so on and so forth. So we had this amazing database, and we surveyed these people. Now, of course, they not only swallow swords, but they do various things while they're doing it. Some of them ride unicycles, some of them ride horses, some of them do the splits, some of them swallow funny-shaped swords, some of them swallow multiple swords. Here's Dan, who incidentally is a US record holder for sword swallowing underwater, swallowing swords underwater. And of course, they do other things as well as swallowing swords. So we had to exclude from our study injuries from swallowing neon tubes or table legs or jackhammers, etc. And this is some of the data that we got back. Most of them swallowed just one sword, but 4 swallowed more than 10 swords at once, and of the people that replied to us, 1 swallowed 16 simultaneously. And when we asked them the number of swords they swallowed in the previous 3 months, the average is 46, but you can see one person swallowed up to 300 swords in the previous 3 months, so you have to see any injuries in the context of their extraordinary behavior. When we asked them about the longest sword, here's the average and the range, and the distance from the incisor teeth to the entrance to the stomach is 40 centimeters, so you can see that most of these got swords into the stomach, at least on some occasions, and the world record is a 7-foot giant who's managed to swallow an 82.5 centimeter sword. So we were very interested to know if there was any correlation between height and weight and the length of the sword that could be swallowed, but I'm afraid we didn't demonstrate any. Just a few of those that injured themselves, 2 that perform as a couple, 1 lacerating the esophagus, the other swallowing a curd saver, and they were subsequently became bankrupt as a consequence of their medical bills. A couple of others. This is a New Zealand sword swallower who's had a couple of major injuries: 1 perforation, 1 laceration on the neck with an abscess. Here's Andrew Stanton from Las Vegas, who's twice vomited blood. And this is a summary of the injuries they've had. 19 reported sore throats, usually when they swallowed swords too much, so during the learning phase, which they call sword throats, and they rarely seek medical advice. They simply abstain from practice. Some of them had passed blood in their stool. Some of them brought up small amounts of blood on the sword. Some of them brought up copious amounts of blood. We believe there were 6 perforations and 3 possible perforations, one of whom had been told that the sword had brushed his heart, the other who had pleurisy, and a third I can't recall. Remarkably, there were no thoracotomies, but 1 bread knife removed from the stomach, some non-specific chest pain, some with shoulder tip referral, And that's the summary. Injuries were underreported, and it's a good idea not to take part. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce one of the world's greatest sword swallowers, who, as I said, has the US record of sword swallowing underwater. And he's also the chief executive of the Sword Swallowers Association International. And you did want me to say some other thing? Ripley's Museum, etc., etc., etc. Ladies and gentlemen, Dan Mayer.
Should we field any questions, or would you actually like to see it?
I don't think they want to see it. I don't think they want to see it.
In the States, there's three things you have to remember. The question was, what do we have to do if you injure yourself, if you hurt yourself? And I always tell my audience there are three things to remember. Here in England, it's 999. I'm sorry?
I don't see too many questions, so perhaps he could...
Nobody has any curiosities.
Yeah, well, perhaps he could just show them or something.
Except Fiona.
Yes.
It's the obvious question. Please may we see you swallowing a sword?
If you insist, Fiona. Would you like to see me swallow a sword? Yes. I brought a little one that I could pack in my suitcase. It's not very easy to fly from the States with swords. This one I picked up at a flea market last Saturday, and while I was in there, I saw the sword in the flea market. These guys were playing guitar. I said, do you mind if I look at this? And I took a look at it, and it looked just about the right size and length, and it had fingerprints all over it. It was a little bit sharp, had a sharp point, but while they were busy playing guitar, my mouth started to salivate a little bit, and you have to lubricate it. And then I went like this. Thank you.
Now, does anyone have any questions? And could you please wait till we get a microphone over to you?
Hi. How did you get into the sword swallowing business? Referencing his earlier questions, how did they learn?
The question was, how did I get into it? People often ask me, how did I discover that I could accidentally swallow a sword? Like I was walking around one day and one just kind of dropped down my throat. It's something that takes years of study and practice. As part of our research, our survey that we did with all the sword swallowers worldwide, of all the results that we found back from all the sword swallowers, it takes on average between 2 years and 7 years to learn how to swallow a sword. It took me 3 years practicing 10 to 12 times a day, every day, before I got my first sword down. So it's not something that you can learn very quickly or easily in an afternoon. Or if you do, it could be tragic.
There is a thing, I believe, called the gag reflex.
Yes.
Operating at the back of the throat. Is this something you learn to avoid, or is throwing up while sword swallowing a common occurrence?
Yes, the gag reflex is something that needs to be dealt with, or else your lunch comes out. I have never had a problem with it, with actually throwing up. Some sword swallowers said that they did that quite a lot for the first several months or years before they overcame it. It is one of the first stages in learning sword swallowing is getting past the gag reflex first. Then you have to after you repress the gag reflex, you have to get your alignment just right, your posture just right, hyperextend the jaw, relax the throat, slide the blade down the pharynx and the upper portion of the throat, behind the Adam's apple, behind the larynx, and then you get to the epiglottis back here. And one of the trickier parts is learning how to flip back the epiglottis so that the blade can go in one of two different directions from here. It can go either down into the esophagus and into the stomach, or down into the pharynx and into the lung, which we don't want to do. So you have to flip the blade, the epiglottis back, slide it down between the esophagus, between the lungs, And the heart actually kind of lies about in the center of the body. You actually have to nudge the heart over. Yes, you do. The esophagus is like a little rubber band or a balloon in your esophagus here, right next to your heart. And as the blade goes down, it is only separated from the heart by about 1/8 of an inch of esophageal tissue. So you actually have to nudge the heart over. Sometimes I will drop a blade, and as the blade drops, if it nudges my heart, it sometimes sends like an electrical impulse through my body. I see stars, and I can kind of feel this jolt as it goes through, as it nudges the heart aside. But then, as it goes down, you have to repress the peristalsis reflex. It's about 50 pairs of muscles that bring your bolus of food down to your stomach. Then you have to relax the lower esophageal sphincter down here, which is a tight rubber band that closes off your stomach. Your stomach is actually a little bit to the left. After you repress that, you need to actually repress the retch reflex in the stomach so that your stomach doesn't retch upwards and try to expel the foreign object. And then you've swallowed a sword. That's in medical terms. In common terms, in plain old English, I usually just ram 2 feet of solid steel down my gullet to tickle the bottom of my tummy.
Okay. I think there's a question over here.
Where was the question?
I think.
How long were you underwater?
Underwater. That was a whole different matter altogether. I was 20 feet underwater, surrounded by about 80 sharks and stingrays at Ripley's, believe it or not, aquarium in Ripley's Aquarium in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. The difficulty of that, the obvious difficulties is when you open your mouth, all the air rushes upwards and vacates your lungs as you're putting the sword in. The other difficulties are if I had to take a quick breath in, it would be very difficult to do with the sword down the throat. And the other ones that we hadn't considered were that the swords were bumping, the sharks were and stingrays were bumping into the sword, so that made it a little bit difficult.
Stop, I'm bored.
Please stop.
Thank you, Ms. Whitaker. And one final ceremonial gesture for the evening.
Ma'am, excuse me. Would you be willing to come up here and help me? I need just a little help with this one.
Oh, okay. Could you come out over here?
We have Mary here with us. Mary, I need your help over here. If you could stand over on this side. I'm going to go ahead and swallow this sword, and I want you to verify, first of all, for everybody, that that is a real sword, that the blade doesn't curl up into the handle, or there's no secret buttons or anything there. Okay. And then once I swallow the sword, I will bow and lean towards you, and I'll ask you to go ahead and remove the sword from the pit of my stomach, if you could, please. Could you do that for me? Okay. Just pull it straight out. Pull it straight out. Whatever you do, don't scrape up my backbone. That kind of hurts when you like that. So just straight out. Please pull it out fairly quickly. If it stays down too long, my stomach can retch and can puncture against the bottom of my stomach. So pull it out fairly quick, but not too fast or it can slice the sides of my throat. So just at a medium speed, if you don't mind. Okay? Can you do that? All right, great. Here goes. We'll try this with no hands. We'll see if my throat will accommodate it. This is a 24-inch long blade. Will go down about to my belly button, about to my, almost to my belt buckle here. Thank you very much.
Dan Meyer, Ryan Whitcomb. I'd like to thank the Imperial Graduate Schools for inviting us here. Thanks to Ms. Sweetie Poo, all our speakers, and to the British Association for the Advancement of Science for organizing Science Week.